Oh, here it goes. Oh, you might want to sit over here.
All right, I think we're good to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Courtney. I'm a policy advisor at the Kentucky Department of Education and a member of the KDE EANS work group. And this is our Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools webinar on preparing your final budget. I do want to say a couple of things before we get started. First, we are recording this meeting, so please be aware that as of right now, this meeting is being recorded. And that will be archived and put up on our website. And also, please be sure to mute your microphones throughout this presentation so that we can try to eliminate some background noise. There will be opportunities at the end for you to unmute and ask questions if you need. I'm also joined today by several members of our EANS work group team, so I want to pause momentarily and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves.
This is David Malonte with KDE. I'm the ombudsman. I've been.
Sorry, David, I think we lost you there. Do you want to try again real quick?
You lost me?
Yeah, I think about halfway through I heard you say ombudsman.
Okay, this is David Malonte. I'm the non-public school ombudsman at KDE, and I have been on a couple webinars with everybody already at this point.
Good morning. My name is Karen Worth, and I'm with the Division of Budgets and Financial Management.
Hi, this is Kay Kennedy. I'm with the Office of Financial Operations as project manager.
Hi, I'm Thelma Hawkins, and I'm with the Division of Budgets and Financial Management.
All right, I think that's our whole team. We've got some more folks who will likely be in and out throughout the presentation as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Here's our agenda for this morning. We're going to begin the presentation with a little bit of background information about why we're here and why we're revisiting the budgets under this program. We'll talk about the final budget review procedures and the budget worksheet itself. And we'll also review some items from the original application, some issues that we're going to need to work with you all to resolve over the next couple of weeks before we can issue awards. All of that should take about 15 minutes, so we're going to kind of clip through it, and then we're going to spend the rest of our time with you today in a question and answer session. We hope that this will be a meaningful technical assistance session for you to be able to start processing what you need to do to finalize your budget. I will say also one thing we're not going to cover in this webinar are the actual procurement procedures and reimbursement procedures and forms that you're going to have to fill out to actually get your services through this program. We're going to be covering that next week at another webinar on the 3rd. So be looking out for that. So this webinar is all about finalizing your budget. Next week, we're going to talk with you about how to actually fill out the forms and complete your procurement requests. So I'm just going to dive right in here and talk to you a little bit about the background and how we got here and why we're doing what we're doing here today. Due to the number of applications and the types of applications that we received, we have been able to increase the allocations across the board for our EANS recipients. So if you remember in our original webinar back in March, we told you to budget for around $400 per student. Well, we've increased that to over $1,000 per student based on the number of awards. So you are getting a significantly larger amount of money than we initially anticipated, which is good news, I hope, for all of you. That you'll have a little more flexibility. You should have received your amounts of services on Thursday last week, the 22nd. So that would have come in an email to you from our team. And then those are also posted to the EANS website. And I'll show you how to get to those at the end of the presentation today. So you know how much your award total will be. One thing to note is that you will see on that notification that it says not to exceed and a dollar amount. So that's going to be really important as we talk about how to create a budget. You've been given a cap, a maximum amount that you can work up to. But you don't necessarily have to take all of that money if you don't want it. And we'll talk about what that might mean to you moving forward. Because we've made this significant jump from $400 to over $1,000, that does require each participant to submit a new budget. So even if you intend to make no changes to your budget, because the new dollar amount is so large, you are still required to submit a new budget to KDE to review.
By May 1st, I think.
So timeline here.
Oh, here.
The timeline really began last Thursday on the 22nd with the notification of assistance and service. So that's sort of our starting our clock there. Today, of course, is the 26th. We're having this technical assistance webinar to kind of walk through the process with you. Later today, after this webinar concludes and before the end of the workday today, you should receive an email from a KDE consultant who has been assigned to work with your school through this process. So each school has been assigned a member of KDE staff who will work one-on-one to provide that technical assistance to actually complete your budget and get that finalized. So you should receive that email today by the end of the day. You will then work throughout the rest of April and into May to finalize your budget. You'll work independently with that staff person who's going to contact you today. So there's no SurveyMonkey, there's no form online that you submit and wait. You're just going to email everything back and forth with that one person one-on-one from now on to get your budget prepped. There is no deadline for this, but the key piece to that is down at the bottom. You will not receive any assistance or services until your final budget is approved. So the faster you work, the sooner you get your access to your services and assistance. So if you need until May 30th to submit your next budget, you can have that time, but just know that that's going to push you well into June before you're able to start receiving any services. Again, I also mentioned Monday on May 3rd, there's going to be another webinar on procurement procedures and forms. So pencil that in if you haven't already, that May 3rd date. And again, you can't have access to any services or assistance until your final budget is complete. So responsibilities on your end as a recipient. First, we ask that you respond promptly to emails from KDE related to your EANS award and to your budget. We will work very expeditiously to get back to you. We ask you to do the same for us. We are operating under some pretty strict federal timelines and deadlines to issue this award and get this program off the ground. So we'll be working very promptly. We ask you to respond in kind. You will be working with your KDE staff person one-on-one to develop a budget that is reasonable, allowable, and necessary. So just like we did with your initial application, we're going to be reviewing these budgets against that reasonable, allowable, and necessary framework. And so you'll be receiving feedback from KDE to get your budget to that point. If you need a reminder about that reasonable, allowable, or necessary framework, you can refer back to the recorded webinar from March 3rd. That is on our EANS webpage. That's where we discussed all of those concepts with you the first time. I do want to note that not all of the items requested in the initial round of applications were reasonable, allowable, or necessary. I would say maybe 20% of our applications had at least one item that is not able to be funded under this program. So your KDE staff person will assist you with making those updates, and we will go through some themes around what those 20% of applications have in common at the end of this presentation. To submit your final budget, you're simply going to email it to your KDE person. So they're going to reach out to you today. They're going to send you a budget template and some instructions. You're going to fill it out, send it back to them. When it's done, they'll approve it, you'll approve it, and then they're going to submit it to the EANS work group on your behalf. So again, there's no online form, there's no formal submission process. Everything is going to be done via email with your KDE staff person moving forward. So one thing I want to mention, I mentioned this earlier about that not to exceed dollar amount. So as you're writing your budgets, you've been given a not to exceed dollar amount. Throughout the life of your grant, you will be able to move money from one line item to another, but you will not be able to tap in to any other funds beyond what's requested in your initial application. So here's what that means. Let's say that your not to exceed dollar amount is $5,000 and you turn in a final budget that has $4,500. So you're leaving $500 on the table. Throughout the life of your grant, you can move stuff from one line item to the other. So let's say that you originally budget for 10 Chromebooks, but you decide you only need 5. So we're going to take Chromebook money and we're going to buy masks and other PPP with it. You're allowed to do that throughout the life of the program. However, if you leave $500 on the table, you cannot come back later and access that $500, okay? So if you've been awarded an up to $5,000, we need you to budget as close to that dollar amount as possible. Whatever that total dollar amount is on your final budget that you're going to submit through this process, that is the total amount of money and services that you will have access to. So if you leave $500 on the table at the end of this process, you cannot come back in 6 months and say, well, now I want that other $500. That's going to be reallocated through our KDE processes. So please budget for your entire eligible amount and know that if you leave money on the table, you're leaving that money on the table. We can't reissue it to you. The budget worksheet that you're going to be working with is an Excel document. So we've tried really hard to make this as easy and straightforward as possible. There are 3 tabs on the Excel document: an instructions tab, a contact info tab, and an actual budget tab. So please make sure that you've read all 3 of those tabs and check them off for completion. I'm going to come off the slides and actually show you that budget worksheet now. So if I see some faces, if I can get some thumbs up that you can see a budget worksheet now. Perfect, I got some thumbs up. So you're going to get this, this budget worksheet today in the email that comes from your KDE staff person. So they'll email you today. This spreadsheet will be attached. You'll see first is an instructions page that walks you through, whoops, that zoomed in way too far. Okay, here we go. You'll see first there's an instructions tab. So this tells you what you have to do step by step to complete this process. We've also included the list of allowable spending categories and the 2 disbursement methods, which is either reimbursements for things you've already acquired or newly requested. So if you remember on the application, you did 2 budgets. You did a newly acquired and a request for reimbursement budget. We're putting it all together into one budget spreadsheet now. So hopefully that will be a little easier for you. On the second tab is the contact information box. So this is the same contact information you put into that original application, plus your easy vendor number. So if you've already received that easy vendor number, please put that in this box as well. As you know, non-public schools are not on file with the Department of Education. So this is the only way that we have to track your paperwork. So please make sure that you fill this out and that this information remains consistent among all of your paperwork. And then finally, you're going to have a budget spending worksheet. And this looks just like any other budget worksheet that you've probably seen or worked with before. I'm going to start over here on the side with this blue box. This blue box is a calculator that's already been programmed for you. So what you'll do in the top is you'll put in your not to exceed award amount right in this first box. And you'll see that that automatically populated my total remaining, and my total requested is 0 because I haven't put any money in yet. You're going to come over here and just put in everything that you want into this application. So spending category is a drop-down menu. So you're going to pick one of those approved spending categories. You can't mess it up because if you try to type in this, you're going to get a warning that says you have to pick from the drop-down menu. So hopefully that should be easy for you to work with. You'll do the same thing for disbursement method, drop-down menu. You'll tell us if it's a reimbursement for something you've already purchased or if it's a newly requested assistance. You're going to describe your item, and you don't need to write a lengthy narrative here in this box. We're looking for kind of like something you would write in your checkbook, right? So 52 Chromebooks. Okay, so we're looking for nice, neat, and succinct item descriptions. You're not going to be asked to rewrite any of the narratives from your original application. Those are archived, those are done. So we're just editing our budget here. You don't have to have asked for it in your original narrative to include it in this budget. So we know we've given you a lot more money. Please go ahead and ask for what you want. In the amount box, you'll put in whatever your total amount is. And you can see that that has automatically updated my calculator over here. So if I keep putting things in, you'll see that it automatically updates. So you can see what you've currently requested and how much money you have remaining to request as you build your budget. So budget template's very straightforward. You're just going to fill it out, tell us what you want, how much it's going to cost. You're going to link it to a spending category and to a disbursement method. Then you will save this spreadsheet and email it back to your KDE contact who's going to contact you later today. And let's see, I've covered that. I've got 2 more slides and then we'll pause and open the floor for questions. So I do want to talk about a couple of common issues from the applications that we're going to need to resolve, and you'll work with your KDE contact to resolve those issues. So the first is that we had several incomplete applications. Originally, in our March 3rd webinar, we told you that we would not be awarding incomplete applications, but because of the volume of applications and the ability of us, we've built some capacity to provide more technical assistance than we anticipated back in March we'd be able to provide. We are going to award those applications that were incomplete. So some applications were submitted without proper signature pages, W-9s, or easy vendor forms. So you might be asked by your KDE staff person to resubmit that form. The #1 problem there is that people forgot to sign them. So especially W-9 forms, because the signature is kind of in a weird spot on that form. So you might be asked to do that. A couple of schools didn't ask for any money and left blank budget pages. So we will remedy that through this budget process. You'll fill out that Excel spreadsheet and turn that in. And then a couple of schools also provided incomplete contact information. So again, you'll fix that with your new Excel template. And then I want to cover a couple of themes of unallowable items. So like I said, we had about 20% of applications that had at least one item that would not be allowable. So I want to just sort of cover these as big buckets, and then your KDE staff person can dig deeper into your budget with you if you need that assistance. So the first thing is capital improvements. So remember that we have to take title over anything that is purchased through this program. So capital improvements are going to be a very uphill battle to try to secure. HVAC is sort of the one exception to that because HVAC is called out as its own category. So let me give you an example. So like we can't build a pavilion for you to host an outdoor classroom because we can't take title over a pavilion that's on your property. But what we can do is provide furniture for your outdoor classroom in your pavilion. So you might have to think a little bit about if you want a capital improvement, what are the pieces that KDE can take title of, and we can fund those components, but we can't. So like in the outdoor classroom example, we can fund the portable dry erase board that you're going to put in your classroom. We can fund the desks that you put in it, but we can't fund the pavilion because we can't take ownership over the pavilion. So you might think about breaking those capital improvements down like that. Another one that we saw in several places were bathroom remodels and upgrades, so sinks and toilets and urinals with like touch-free dispensers and things like that. We can't fund that because we can't take title over your bathroom remodel. So think about, just think about as you're building those things, can KDE take title on this? Custodial services. This is one that originally in March we told you was allowable, and then U.S. Department of Education changed their mind halfway through the process. So don't feel bad if you missed this because we almost missed it too. So under this program, we cannot fund custodial services, but we can provide custodial stuff and supplies. So we can't pay for Stanley Steamer to come clean your carpets, but we can pay for you to buy a carpet cleaner and the shampoo and all of that to go in your carpet cleaner. Okay, so thinking about that it does represent a change from what we originally told you in March. U.S. Department of Ed did change that rule kind of out from under us. The other one that we saw, safety measures. So there is a allowable bucket of stuff for health and safety measures, but they have to be health and safety measures tied to COVID. So things like clear backpacks, metal detectors, things that are safety measures that you would put into place for like physical safety, right, to protect students from harm, those are not allowable under this program. Only health and safety measures that are directly connected to COVID are allowable under this program. So if you ask for clear backpacks or metal detectors and those sorts of things, we're going to ask you to revisit those items. Essential staff. So staffing is kind of a weird one under the EANS program. In short, we can't help you make payroll. Okay, so think about when you're thinking about staff, is this somebody like an assistant principal or a guidance counselor who we're already paying or would have already been paying without this program? If that's the case, we can't help you make payroll for that staff. What we can help you do is bring in somebody specifically targeted toward COVID response. So an instructional assistant on a 1 semester or 1 year contract specifically to work with students on reading loss due to COVID. That might be an allowable staff person. But an assistant principal would not be an allowable staff person. That's an essential staff. That's part of your normal payroll. So that one is a little nuanced, and we're happy to talk that through with you if you have specific questions. And then the last one here is in classroom technology. So this is another one that's a little nuanced. Because technology is an allowable expense, but it has to be technology related to COVID and related to either learning loss or remote learning. And so things like interactive touchscreen monitors for the classroom or high-end overhead projectors. Those are not going to be allowable under the EANS program because if school closes again in August, let's say we have another resurgence and schools have to close again, that $20,000 touchscreen monitor is hanging on the wall in an empty classroom. And we can't fund that. That's no longer connected to COVID and remote learning. Now, that's not to say that technology purchases cannot be used in the classroom. So certainly if you buy 50 Chromebooks so that you can send Chromebooks home with your students for remote learning, we're not going to say that you cannot then use those Chromebooks in the classroom. Of course you can do that. So thinking about portability of items is really important, and making that clear connection to COVID and to learning loss is really important as you think about classroom technology. Again, that one's a little nuanced, and we're happy to kind of talk through that with you on an individual basis. So with that, that wraps up our slides. So looks like I'm at 23 minutes, a little longer than I intended to talk. So I'm going to actually pause and open the floor for questions. We'll spend the rest of our time today trying to address questions. I do see that there are some questions in the chat. So I'm going to actually mute and let some of my colleagues on the EANS team who've been monitoring the chat see if they want to elevate any questions for group discussion.
Matthew, I'll just start in the chat if that's okay.
Go for it, David.
The first one said, will our new assigned consultant know and tell us if items from our budgets were not acceptable? And I put in the chat, but just I know some people are calling in. The consultant that contacts you next will have your original applications and will have your evaluation rubric. So if you ask them if there were any unallowable items, they should be able to tell you and provide that information to you. Let's see, hold on just a second. One person said they could not see any of the document, the amendment document. And what I said is that's going to be attached to the email that you received today. And there are some instructions for completing it. It is I think a 3-tab workbook is what it was. And then instructions are on the first tab. So it says, if we are planning to use some of the money for personnel, can we plan for salaries over more than one school year? And would it be possible to budget to pay an interventionist for more than 1 year? I would say yes, it would be possible to pay for an interventionist or somebody that's coming in to tackle the learning loss issues that you have for more than 1 year. This money has to be obligated within 6 months. So we want to make sure those types of things are specifically in your budget, so we know. In an instance like that, Matthew, tell me if you agree, I would probably add a little bit of detail to say we would like to have a staff member hired for learning loss for this year and next year, for example, or for the summer and next year, something like that.
Yes, I would agree. And so I do see that there's lots of questions in the chat about staff. So those are going to be really targeted. I would encourage you to direct those questions to your staff person who's going to reach out to you today, because there really is, like I said earlier, some nuance into whether or not a staff member is allowable, just because the way that this grant has to be so closely tied to the COVID response. So we might not be able to answer all of those in depth today, just because they're going to require some conversation, but your KDE staff person will be able to assist you with that as well.
I put a comment that said Matthew, and I was going to follow up with an additional comment, but I was going to speak to the items that you said were unallowable. U.S. Department of Education issued guidance a few weeks after we had some of our initial webinars. So if you'll recall, we sent a link to that out, and it's posted on our EANS page. They had apparently received some questions and provided some additional guidance. So please refer to that guidance when talking about particular allowable issues. They have marked those with something like new, March, whatever it was, whatever date they issued it, March 19th or something like that. So you'll be able to identify which questions are new or are revised within that guidance. Sorry, that was my phone. Has the dollar threshold been set for when the state will have to inventory items like laptops? Do we want to say that's going to be addressed next week? Karen, do you have any input in that or on that?
Yeah, we have set the threshold. We're still kind of hashing that out and having that conversation here internally. So let's have that finalized and able to share next week when we talk on Monday.
Okay. Could you review the HVAC allowance of EANS funds? What is allowed in more detail? So I think HVAC, ventilation, HVAC. Matthew, do you have any comments on that one particularly?
So the HVAC one is the one kind of weird thing, because we do have that piece where we have to take title on it, but there is some allowability around like HVAC upgrades. Things that for sure we can do for you are like any of those, portable air purifiers, anything that's not like a permanent fixture. That's a definite yes. I do not believe that we are able to replace a whole HVAC system because we have to take title on that. So that would be like a capital improvement that we couldn't physically own. And then there's lots of nuance in the HVAC, because there's, things like lights that get installed inside of the HVAC system, or certain filtration pieces that are installed inside of the HVAC system. And those sort of case-by-case things, we're just going to need to have a conversation with you about. So that's one that I would encourage you to direct to your KDE consultant later today, and let us sort of see what your individual circumstance is.
Okay, portable air purifiers / sanitizers would be allowable. It's a new funding request, and yes, they are. Those are specifically allowable. Can we count a current employee whose duties changed because of COVID? Well, I think the bottom line here is we have learned that employees cannot be reimbursed. What you can do is request staffing, for example, for learning loss, to provide additional services to students in relation to COVID impacts. However, you got to keep in mind that those staff would have to be hired by the Department of Education, or Karen, have we decided if we're going to go through some of the co-ops to do the hiring?
Yeah, that's definitely a conversation. And decisions will be made based on, the individual request, to be able to get, to get the service that the
Yeah.
non-public school needs.
Yeah, so essentially those staff for future services will be contracted for time by the department in some way. In the first application, it was separated between reimbursements and new allocations. With the combination of the two, are we still allowed to get approval for purchases and make those in a more timely manner and then get reimbursed for these? You are still allowed to do future reimbursements for this particular program. Now, to clarify, there will be another round of funding coming where reimbursements will not be allowed, period. So keep that in mind for things that are allowable for reimbursement. On the EANS page, in that introductory paragraph in the middle of the page, there is a listing of things that are and are not allowable for reimbursement. So refer to that, refer to USED's guidance linked on that page. But yes, for this particular program, you are allowed to have those future reimbursements as well. So can we get a copy of our original SurveyMonkey document? Is that something they could request from their consultant contact, Matthew?
Yes, it is. So your consultants do have your original applications and we'll be able to send it to you. And we're thinking about for round 2 how we might be able to do that differently, because we know that those sort of got sucked into the SurveyMonkey server and you don't have access to that anymore. So that probably wasn't the fully best method that we could have used. So we're working on that, solving that for next time. But for now, your KDE consultant does have access and can send it to you.
So we are hoping, or hold on, can the new employee to be hired related to learning loss be hired by the school, or do they have to be KDE or contracted employee? Again, they would have to be a contracted employee. We are hoping to hire special needs consultants to work with a student on mental health needs and learning loss. Is this allowable? The learning loss piece would be allowable. However, we have determined under this particular program, the mental health piece would not be an allowable cost, as it is not covered under one of the allowable spending categories. If we have to hire a new teacher for next school year to spread out our students in the fall. So for example, in the chat, provide some additional details. I think this is a question about distancing of students, but I just want to make sure before we provide an answer.
And David, while we're waiting for that person to respond, I will say again, thinking about payroll, right? So remember that staff are contract staff with the department. So if this is somebody who you would normally have hired and is part of your normal payroll, we can't help you with that because they have to be our staff. So if it's somebody who you're going to contract, the understanding is that person's only going to be here 1 year, specifically because of COVID, they're on contract with KDE, then that's one thing. If it's, we need another teacher because we normally have 20 third graders and next year we're going to have 45 third graders, so we need to hire another teacher, that would not be allowable. That's a normal payroll situation.
Yeah, that was a social distancing question. And I think the answer to that particular piece, in light of COVID impacts and being able to socially distance according to CDC guidelines, I think that might be allowable. What are your thoughts on that, Matthew?
I agree. I think that is allowable as long as, again, under the understanding that that person is a KDE employee on this for this project only. not on any kind of continuing or long-term contract. It has to be a sort of time-bound, specifically tied to COVID situation.
Yeah. So we've got a question. Why was my amount not the exact calculation, 1,050 times the amount of students and 525 times low income students? The amount not to exceed was less.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. The federal government required us to apply priority reductions for schools that received Paycheck Protection Program loans and equitable services. So the way the program is structured is that schools who did not receive those things should get more money than schools who did receive one or both of those things. So there was a priority reduction applied on the back end. That was an expectation of the federal government due to their prioritization. I will also say too, we anticipate that low income prioritization will be a larger factor in EANS round 2. So kind of be watching for that when we get the final word from the federal government. We think that there will probably be more of those kinds of priority reductions built into the second round.
So can you clarify what is meant by the phrase in the email sent Thursday? Keep in mind that any funds not obligated by August 23rd, 2021 will be returned to the governor's office. Can you clarify what is meant by not obligated and the date? So essentially, obligated means we have to have contracts in place. We have to have some plans to spend these dollars essentially within 6 months. Otherwise, funds are directed back to the governor's office. Now, there is an exception to that, and if there are issues with getting funds out the door in a timely manner or obligated in a timely manner, we may be able to go back to USAID with an explanation of that. And get an extension to that. That's not promised by any means, but there is an exception to that. Our goal is to get everything obligated, contracted, ready to spend within 6 months, though. Just to clarify on that also, that is statutorily required. We're just trying to fall in line with what is required of us at the SEA. If I need more space for social distancing, students in a storage space has to be remodeled into a classroom. Would flooring be covered under the funds? I do not believe so, as that would be a capital improvement. But Matthew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We can't take ownership over your flooring because we can't take that back.
Yeah. You mentioned that HVAC could be an allowable expense. Can you expand on this topic, please? And I think we've kind of said we're going to have to take those by case situation at this point. So we will work through the consultants and work with our budget and our budget staff to come up with the best possible solution for that. Are HVAC units allowable? We were told that they were not, and again, I think we're going to have to work through situations on a case-by-case basis. Specifically, the statute says that ventilation improvements are allowable. So I think if that's something you're interested in and that's a need, we're going to have to work through that with you on a case-by-case basis.
And I think, David, the key word there is improvements. So I think it's my understanding that the U.S. Department of Education has interpreted that as improvements to an existing system, not rip out an old system and put in a new system.
Yeah, and that's a piece of the guidance that came after some of our initial conversations with everybody. Would wall-mounted air purifiers be covered? And I would say they would probably be covered. Again, that's something we may need to take title over or title of, but I think those could be covered as long as they are not considered permanent pieces of the structure. Remote learning cameras and audio systems we have tried simply do not improve home learning environments as much as we want. We are looking at a custom solution that is far more expensive. How do we know if it will be deemed reasonable? What I would say is when you're working with your consultant, you might give them some details and they may need to come back to us and talk through those details with us before the budget is finally approved. Any comments on that, Matthew?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think you're just going to need to describe what you're doing and talk to your consultant about it. All of the consultants, so the way that this kind of works, if we pull the curtain back, is you've got this central EANS team who runs the program. That's us on this webinar. And then we have to have other consultants kind of independently looking at applications. And so we're sort of like we act sort of as the arbiter. If they get stuck with something, they'll bring it to us. So you'll work directly with them, tell them what you want, why you want it, and then if they are unable to determine reasonability on their own, they'll bring it to us, and our committee will work with them on that.
So adding so many new student devices will undoubtedly strain our infrastructure. Will updates, additions to wiring and access points be allowable or not, since you can't take title of these? I would say if they're considered permanent, no, we would probably say those are not allowable, but access points, things of that nature that are used to increase internet access, I would think those would be removable.
Yeah, I agree, David. I think it just depends kind of on what you're, again, specifically trying to accomplish with this project. If you're going to increase access points, so you're putting in like routers and things like that, then we would take title of the router, and then you would be able to use EANS funds to pay for the installation, right? So the router is the thing, and then the installation is a service, and so that's different if you're paying for somebody to like crawl in the crawl space and drag a wire from one end of the building to the other. That's not really, I wouldn't see that as a capital improvement. I would see that as necessary service to facilitate implementing the new hotspots in your building. So that's one of those, again, kind of nuanced things that you'll need to talk specifically with your KDE consultant about. But I would say, yes, I think that's probably allowable because we would take title over the stuff.
So just to clarify, if we ask for an instructional aide or interventionist, can the school fund the staff, but they would be contracted through KDE? I would, so there may be some consultation that goes into that. If you have staff that are already identified, you might want to pitch those to us to make the hiring process a little more efficient. Otherwise, KDE will have to post for those positions per se and have to do the hiring for those.
And I would also
go ahead, Matthew.
I was going to say, I would also just ask for the procurement members of our internal EANS team. We'll want to make sure that we cover this staffing, the actual hiring of staff next week. There's lots of questions about that. So I just want to put that on the radar.
Who determines the amount those added instructional assistants or interventionists are paid? Will you assign the interventionist or do we have to hire them ourselves? I think we've covered that one. And then again, how do you determine the rate of pay for budgeting purposes? Right now, for budgeting purposes, what we've asked you to do is kind of follow your own salary schedules or contracting schedules for those types of services. I think in the end, those instructional staff people will be, the pay will be determined based on our contract agreement at KDE. However, use your own existing salary schedules to plan for that. That'll at least give us a direction to move in. What about labor costs associated with HVAC improvement projects? Matthew, I haven't seen anything, but I think you kind of covered that with your conversation about wiring and things of that nature. Anything to add to that?
No, I think I would say the same thing about this. So if it's an approvable improvement project, then I think that we would also pay the cost to actually implement that improvement.
That is the end of our chat questions.
Okay, and I do see that we have some hands up, so I'm going to go to Daniel McGeaney.
Perfect. So I thank you all for hosting this webinar. I'm unable to see the chat, so that's why I raised my hand. But the question I had was, so when you said that interactive touch displays wouldn't be permissible expenditures, you explained that this is because they're not useful in the event of fully virtual instruction. But our school's response to COVID-19 has been to utilize a hybrid model this year. And so, that's based on CDC requirements for social distancing. And the reason that's relevant is because the technology needs to deliver effective hybrid education are different from the technology needs to deliver fully virtual education. So like as an example, if we had a bunch of Chromebooks, that's not going to help us with the specific problem of delivering good quality education to both the group that's at home and also the group that's sitting in the classroom. So when we're looking at meeting the needs, the instructional needs and the technology that's required, should we focus only on fully NTI models, even if it's not how we've operated this year? Or is this a conversation we should have with our KDE representative?
Yeah, so this is definitely a conversation to have with your KDE representative. So first I'll say, if you ask for those touchscreens, you're not the only school to ask for those touchscreens. That was a common theme, which is how it landed on my slide. And that's not to say that every school would have been automatically denied for those touchscreens, because the rationale behind that touchscreen matters, right? So I think what you've explained is how your touch screens are facilitating that hybrid model with kids who you have that are home. I think does bring it back into the realm of an allowable COVID-related expense. So you'll just have that conversation with your KDE contact when they reach out to you today, and then they'll be able to help you. That's one of those real nuanced kinds of things.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Let's see, the next hand I see on my list, and I apologize, I don't know if these are what order these are in. So if you've had your hand up for a long time and it seems like I'm skipping you, I'm seeing them in a certain order on my screen. So I'm going to go to Lisa Cheel.
Hi, thank you so much. Can we use funds to pay for professional development for the teachers that we already have to address learning intervention?
David, I'm going to ask you to help me with this one, because I felt like there was a restriction maybe for reimbursement of PD.
I think so professional development for learning loss would be allowable. There is one piece of professional development that cannot be reimbursed, and that is professional development around use of personal protective equipment, or how to, I'm just going to say, contain the coronavirus or suppress the coronavirus. So that particular piece would not be reimbursable, but I believe that professional learning for teachers on how to tackle learning loss in light of COVID impacts would certainly be an allowable expense.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I had a couple of other hands, but it looks like they have since gone down. So I hope that we've answered those questions. So I'm just going to be a good teacher and allow a little wait time to see if there are other questions that someone wants to raise your hand and ask or pop in the chat before we wrap up today. So I'm going to just mute and be quiet. Oh, it looks like Lisa has a question.
Sorry, I should have asked this. Before we had asked, we had to hire an actual professional cleaning service to come in due to this. We used to have parents come in and clean the building for us. And so with COVID, we had to hire a professional cleaning company. Is that not allowed anymore? Because that comes under custodial, or can we hire them still and get reimbursed and for future?
US Ed has specifically said that contracts and staffing for those types of services would not be allowable. That was one of the items in their updated guidance in the middle of March. However, they did say in relation to that, that supplies and materials would still be allowable for those services.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I've got a chat question, Matthew. If a retired teacher from Kentucky Public Schools is interested in an intervention position, will they work under the same restrictions as if they would like returning to their work after retirement? Specifically, the number of days permitted to work and the 90-day return to work status. Karen, this may be something you need to consider, and I don't consider for next week, and I don't know if you have any comments on that right now.
Definitely we'll address next week, but my first response would be yes, that those are not the 90-day wait. Those are not requirements set by Department of Education, but rather by the retirement system. So I would think that those would apply regardless of what the retired teacher from a public school was going to start doing. So my first inclination is to say yes, that those would still apply, but we'll make sure and research with KTRS and have a definitive answer for you next week.
Yeah, Karen, I tend to agree with that as well. That's not specifically our requirement. So
right, thank you.
Got another text question, and then I see another hand up, Matthew. So on the inventory question, sorry about that. On the inventory question from earlier, I know Karen wasn't ready to share the dollar amount, but can you tell us, hold on, can you tell us if items over that chosen amount will need a physical inventory tag? Karen, I think the answer to that one is going to be yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, and I think Scott might be on here too. I wanted to make sure that if he wanted to jump in that he could, but yes, that would be that's the intention.
Okay, and Matthew, I had one more pop in the chat. Following up on the interactive flat panels, if those devices allow for recording live lessons for future use by students remaining at home under hybrid plans, would that reinforce allowability? Matthew, do you have a comment on that?
I think yes. I think that would make that an allowable item. So again, that's a conversation you're going to need to have with your KDE consultant about how you intend to use that item. And really, if you're asking for something that you think is kind of on the cusp of allowability or reasonability, really be prepared to make the case for how that item directly ties to your COVID response. Because if you can make a strong case to your COVID response, then that's going to help you prove allowability and reasonability.
Okay, that's it in the chat for now.
All right, so let's go to Brooks McLam. I see a hand.
My question has to do with the potential. We're thinking of renting a tent in order to have an outdoor graduation rather than indoors to ensure social distancing. Would that be something that might be allowable as a reimbursement?
Matthew, we have approved similar things for other people for graduation. The thing we have run into in certain cases is reasonableness of costs. So I think if you make a case for it and you have done some research on cost and have selected the vendor that would provide you the best, most reasonable cost for that particular rental, I think that might be an allowable expense.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to just give one more pause for wait time to see if there's other questions or hands raised.
I have one in the chat. Hold on just a second. What about purchasing tents for use as outdoor classrooms? And again, we have allowed that for other people. The reasonable cost issue does come into play here as well. But yes, that it's actually one of the CDC recommendations is to use outdoor spaces to ensure social distancing. So yes, that could be an allowable purchase in relation to COVID impacts.
And just keep in mind the difference there is that that tent is an item that we can take title on, whereas like a pavilion is a permanent structure on your property that we can't take back if we ever needed to. So that's the difference.
Yeah, so we have allowed both purchase of those tents and we have allowed rentals of those tents within the reasonable bounds cost-wise.
All right, I think with that question, we're running up on our time. So I just want to thank you all again for your time and for hopping on to this webinar so quickly. We know that we just sent out last week and said, hey, get on a webinar with us on Monday so we could talk about this. So we appreciate your flexibility in being able to do that. In terms of next steps, so you should receive by the end of the day today a communication from your KDE consultant. That will include the spreadsheet that you'll fill out, as well as a copy of the award notification document so that you have that as well. And then you will work back and forth via email with that consultant. I say via email. If you want to meet with them, I'm sure that they will meet with you. Just ask. And then we will get your applications finalized and processed. Remember that you cannot have access to any services or reimbursements until after your final budget is approved. So please work expeditiously to complete that process. And then also be reminded next week, there's going to be another webinar on Monday. I think it's at 2 o'clock. Then that webinar will go over all of the procurement questions, the forms, and some of those sort of procedural things. But remember, budget first. You got to have your budget before we can give you access to any of those services. So with that, we're going to wrap up today and be looking for an email from a member of our team. So thank you all so much for your time and attention.
Thank you all. Thanks, Matthew, for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.